So you see this as a user engagement problem rather than a political problem. It's just a complete reframe of the problem itself. If you see this as he's political, she's political, this is bad, that's good, those are all things that basically hold you back. And you're not going to look at it from the point of solving the problem, you're just going to vent continuously, and it doesn't get you anywhere. But if you can state that as a problem statement, this is what my user is looking for, or this is what my user is not doing, now it's a game, because you need to get them to do something else.
Why did I become an executive coach? I saw lots of great people fail to get ahead at work, while their much less talented peers blew right past them. That made me furious, but also curious. What were great people getting wrong? It came down to helping them re-examine what drove success, and then helping them make critical shifts, one hard truth at a time.
Feel like you're doing everything you were told, but you're not moving ahead at work nor having the impact you seek? Then welcome to 97% Effective with Michael Winderoth, where we skip feel-good, happy talk and engage experts in pointed conversations about what it really takes to move the needle at work and your career. So if you feel stalled or frustrated, or seek that extra edge as you move to the next level, then look no further. This is the Hard Truths Playbook you never got.
Hi, I'm Michael Winderoth, and you're listening to 97% Effective. Today, we're going to talk about office politics. The topic probably makes you cringe, even if you know politics are an inescapable part of organizational life. And as research shows, and many of you who have spent time in companies realize, your political skills are a bigger determinant to rising in organizations than your raw intelligence or even your hard work. When the topic of office politics comes up, my guest today did, for much of his career, do what many of us do. He avoided it. But he made an important shift in his thinking and approach. And rather than turn him into a corporate backstabber or change his core beliefs, this shift has made him even more effective and successful at what he and his team does and he loves and brings him to work every day. Innovation and producing blockbuster hits in the gaming industry and bringing those out into the world. I think hearing from our guest, Keshav Pitani, VP of R&D at game developer Light & Wonder, is particularly important because he's an engineer, self-professed introvert, corporate entrepreneur, and still loves diving in and getting his hands dirty with technical issues. Keshav, really thankful to have you on. Welcome to 97% Effective.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So, Keshav, you live and breathe innovation. I didn't talk about your bio, but just to share a few things. You've worked on so many innovations. You started your career, you are from India. You started your career working in Tokyo, developing modems for IBM. Then you went to Iowa for Rockwell, where you were working on airline cockpit systems. And then we're 1 week short of being the first to patent Wi-Fi, working in the Bay Area tech scene. And then that moved into numerous gaming companies, lottery games for the past decade for Bally, which got acquired by Scientific Games, which got acquired by Light & Wonder, where you are VP right now. So very accomplished career. If I just asked you here at the beginning, what has been the piece of work of all of that you're most proud of?
Thanks again, Michael. So if you had asked me that question probably 5 years ago or even before that, my answer would have been a more technical, technology-related innovation stuff. Today, if you ask me that, I think the most rewarding stuff I've done is probably seeing the people I mentored really succeed beyond what they ever imagined, and ending up in some top-notch companies or flourishing everywhere else. Some even went to NASA. So that's really proud moment for me.
So there's this deep theme of really caring and developing others that drives you. What we're going to talk about today is, and I know your expertise is around innovation, corporate entrepreneurship, and design thinking, but we're not going to go there because we're going to talk about office politics, as I mentioned in the introduction. And so we'll talk about personal lessons and then how you also apply them. If we go back, we first met at Stanford when you were doing executive education there, at which point you were already quite accomplished in your career and very successful. Can you paint a picture, right? Because you did make an inflection point after that and during the program. But, what was corporate life like for you kind of pre some of these shifts towards how you looked at office politics? So what was going well or maybe not as well kind of prior to?
So yeah, as you mentioned, as you alluded to earlier, I was pretty much a geek focusing on solving problems. Keep your head down, analyze, synthesize, solve the problem, which was a lot more fun than anything else. As you start growing in your career, everybody notices this, and I kept noticing it too. But while it was bothering that people who really are not very competent getting promoted because they could talk better or they're close friends to the guy in power, stuff like that. But still, the idea was always, well, you focus on work, this is what you enjoy. You tell yourself, you constantly, say that this is the right thing. That's the wrong thing. Focusing on anything other than problem solving, other than technology, is probably a wrong thing. So you pose yourself this dichotomy where it's wrong versus right, rather than this is going to help if I change my frame. And I didn't come to that until very late. At Stanford is when I first started realizing that. And eventually when I started talking to you and working with you, all that stuff helped me change. So prior to that change, it was all about just focus on what you're doing. And it was a lot of fun too, while it was also hurting, and you feel frustrated a lot. But at the same time, it keeps you going while it also keeps you holding back. So there was a lot of friction between moving forward and going back kind of stuff. So that was what was going on with me in the corporate life.
Yeah, because I remember you talking about you were senior director at that time. You would always be in the room. You were always invited into the room with all the VPs. So you had all of your peers had kind of more senior titles. You were delivering a lot of work for them, and that didn't always match up with your titles or compensation. Were there other, say, costs to, or even benefits to keeping your head down?
Actually, I used to think it's beneficial to not engage in those office politics and not get into it, because it always felt like, well, you focus on your work, this is fun. You tell yourself that this is going to get recognition at some point, that stuff is going to be bad and all that. But what you end up doing is, it's frustration in the back end of it. It's the back of your mind, you're constantly irritated, and it reflects on, day to day. You just don't notice it. You just you get by with everything, and you go on with your life, and you think you're going on, but it kind of starts to wear on you a little bit. And especially when you start to see that people who are less competent than you and people who barely do anything get promoted and keep moving forward. And you start to wonder, what are you doing right or wrong? And you start to blame the system, blame someone else constantly. You blame the boss, or you blame the company, or you start looking for something else. So this is how you naturally keep coming at it, rather than trying to address the problem. And because you don't even know how to think about the problem at that point. Right? I don't think I would have figured out, unless I was exposed to Jeff's class or you or somebody else. I wouldn't have reframed it.
Yeah. So what did shift your thinking? If you kind of look back at your transition, was there a moment or something you heard, read, or did yourself that got you to think differently about that?
Yeah, I would say it started at Stanford for sure. In Jeff's class very early on, and I'm talking about Professor Jeff Pfeffer at Stanford, in his class very early on, he makes a statement. I think it was in the first class itself. He says, being politically savvy is directly related to managerial performance. It almost doesn't make any sense when you first hear it. It's like, oh, that cannot be true. And you kind of discredit that in your mind, saying, well, how is that true? How is being politically savvy has anything to do with your performance at all? And it takes time to judge that statement. And, you also allude to it in your book, right? Good performance doesn't guarantee that you'll maintain your position of power, and poor performance doesn't mean that you'll necessarily lose your job, stuff like that. It's basically starting to think about what is being said in that class, or even in this book, in your book, you also talk about those things. And how does it actually make sense is the first thought that comes to you. And then as you go through that whole learning sessions and everything else, eventually he throws so much research at people who are analytical like me that it has to make sense, and it starts to make sense. But none of it actually prepares you for the real world, though. That's all theoretical. It's perfect in theory, but when you have to deliver that, and you have to actually act on that as an introvert, that's very challenging. It's the beginning of the whole transformation was the course and Stanford exposure and talking to you and all that stuff, I would say.
So you've painted a picture where you read some research because you're analytical, and so didn't make sense, but you saw the research. What were some of the things that you did or you shifted in your approach? Do you have any kind of specific examples of what did office politics then look like to you?
Right. So one of the things that I started to shift about was how you view this, because initially, as I said, was always a dichotomy, was good versus bad, evil versus good, that kind of stuff. You're looking at right and wrong, but when you change it to this is just a problem to solve, right? When you start looking at it as, well, what's the problem statement here? Is he looking for power, or in your assumption, is he looking to dominate you, or is she looking to do something? And it's mostly men that dominate these scenes anyway. And when you're thinking about, well, why is he not accepting what I'm saying? Because this makes a lot of sense. I proved it logically. This is the right way to do it. And yet he doesn't want to move forward with it, right? This is one of the very early things most of the beginning managers start to face, or leads at lead level start to face this. It's always some insecurity or something is what you dismiss as, rather than you think of this as, it's a problem. He's trying to solve something. And then as you start to dig into it, you start to figure out that there's an easier way to solve this if you can, scale back the emotion a little bit and start looking at it objectively. And once you start looking at it objectively, you start to think, well, the problem is he's a skeptic or a cynic about this. Now, how do you change the skeptic, right? And one of the things that we read about in change management and all this power literature is that the idea that you figure out your believers, your followers, or this is one of the things you help me most with. I know a lot of people at my work. I have a lot of influence with many people, a lot of respect, but I never leveraged any of it or used it in any way. And when you start to consciously think about it, initially it kind of makes you very uncomfortable, right? You feel like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, but in the end you're trying to solve a problem. So I started to think about it as an experiment, where, well, this is the problem statement, and let me try to solve it this way. If it works, it works. If not, I have to figure out something. And then you say, okay, he's a skeptic. Let's assume he's a skeptic, and then try to find a believer or someone else. Find the person they trust, and then talk to them and see if you can influence in an indirect way. And they start to shift, or they start to solidify, whatever that outcome may be. But in the end, you're starting to see some result of this experiment. Now it becomes fun because it's not politics anymore. It's a live experiment in behavioral science. So you start to see that you're analytical, you're this geeky guy who's trying to do all these things. So all of this thing comes to, on paper, you're experimenting with the humans and their behavior. And it becomes really less stressful more than anything. I mean, it's not zero stress. It'll still stressful, because if someone thinks you're playing politics or running experiments on them, they're going to be really pissed at you. But when you start to see that finding a believer and finding a follower that you have, and trying to encircle them, the skeptics, with these people who believe in you, or people who support you, who can promote you, that helps a lot. It helps a lot in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and you do come from the gaming or the gaming development industry. And so I remember you saying once, I thought was very insightful comment, that you kind of viewed this as a game and how to solve it, which goes into your previous comment. Can you say more about that?
Right. So, yeah, when you start to think about, what's the problem statement, right? When you think about games and gaming, you're thinking about, how do I get the player to stay engaged, right? Well, he won a certain number of coins, or he won some credits, or he won some, flags or something, some badges. Now, that's just the first level of XP, experience points he's getting. Now, if the player gets a certain number of points, it's just boring after that. He needs to get to the next level of challenge. So it's the same thing. You try and circle someone with the idea. First, you go talk to them about your idea being better than theirs, or you want to get something out of them. whatever. It's ultimately all about resources versus power, and all those things, right? So when you approach that with, okay, I'm going to try this. Let's see what happens. And you see that the result is either good or bad. Now, what you're thinking is the player had bad experience. I have to change the experience for the player to be more positive so they shift and they stay more engaged. Because for me, that player who is the politician on the other side has to stay engaged in my game so he can continue to play this. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I want to create that experience for them so they shift their mind and stay engaged with me and get to the result together. Because ultimately, if you don't have any, even if you have bad agendas, if you don't want to use it for bad purposes, it's all going to work out well in the end if they believe in you and you believe in them. And if it's a meritocracy, it'll work well. If it's not, it's probably not the right place for you to continue for very long. And, that might even be helpful. But, people just blame toxicity for everything because a person disagrees with them or a person doesn't give them what they want. I see it as, well, let's find the problem statement. What is the highest level problem? Let's abstract it out and then start digging in. And so you're now making it a multi-level game. Basically, that's how we design a game, right? Multi-level player, role-playing game. So you start to think about it like that. And then you dig and the next level, they engage. At some point, either they believe in you or you believe in them. You could be convinced too, right? Or, you move on, but it doesn't hurt you as bad as if you keep, calling them names or, saying things that hurt you or them, whatever. It doesn't move it forward. It just keeps you in a circle that doesn't help you.
I love that analogy and, talking about it as a multi-level game and keeping people engaged. You mentioned that keeping people engaged means, and this is humans we're dealing with. So you have called yourself an introvert and you feel, very introverted. So going out and engaging people, for those out there who think of themselves as introvert, can be very exhausting. And so was going and collecting information, keeping people engaged, moving them up the multi-level game, how did you deal with that?
It is exhausting. It still is exhausting. I would not say it's going to be easy, but it's not as stressful because introverts get exhausted just getting through the day anyway. You just work in an office space, you're exhausted by the end of the day. Especially if you're in a managerial role, you actually have to talk to people. You cannot avoid that. As you start to develop that skill set where you can talk to people, even if you're exhausted by the end of the day, you want this sense of achievement. So that's what you're looking for. And that's what is actually going to drive you. So when you're looking for that satisfaction or whatnot, you cannot avoid engaging with people. And if you're trying to design games or if you're trying to do a product that engages users in the end, you have to interact with users at some point. And a good designer always starts with the user, right? You cannot avoid the user. If you're going to avoid user, you shouldn't be in designing products or games for people, right? So you do have to interact at some level. So it comes with the territory of being in R&D, right? You have to ultimately create a product for your end user. And user engagement is very critical in any product, whether it's games or any other kind of product, right? So you see this as a user engagement problem rather than a political problem. It's just a complete reframe of the problem itself. If you see this as he's political, she's political, this is bad, that's good, those are all things that basically hold you back. And you're not going to look at it from the point of solving the problem. You're just going to vent continuously, and it doesn't get you anywhere. But if you can state that as a problem statement, this is what my user is looking for, or this is what my user is not doing, now it's a game, because you need to get them to do something else.
You've been listening to 97% Effective with your host, Executive Coach Michael Winderoth. If this interview is making you think, make sure to share it with a friend. Now, back to our interview.
To take this, you abstract it up, but then to take it down to real brass tacks, you have an example of how you've done this? I know you've had conflicts as inevitable over kind of where resources get allocated, and you had some very powerful conversations with key stakeholders, framed stuff in specific ways, and ended up with huge budgets and resources. But can you share a little bit about, so people can kind of connect this to how it actually works or works for you?
Yeah, I think I also, I have a new insight. Probably we discussed it. I don't know if I discussed this one with you lately, but like one of the things you say, and even in several books, they say is individuals who are competing for advancement, they bend the rules or they break the rules, of fair play and stuff like that. But when you think about it, the rules that they're breaking are actually rules that are established to maintain the status quo, right? Rules are generally established to maintain the status quo. Bending or breaking the rules means changing the status quo. Now, isn't that innovation, right? It is technically innovation. Innovation is changing status quo. So ultimately, if you frame the problem as it's office politics, it is technically office politics. I mean, not technically, it's literally office politics, but from a technical standpoint, it is a innovation problem, is how I frame it sometimes. And okay, let's see what's the status quo here. What is the rule we're trying to break here? And one of the golden rules of breaking rules is that you understand why the rule exists. And once you get to that point and understand why the rule exists and why are they breaking it, why can't you break it, you clearly realize that they break the rules because they understand how it's going to impact them. You just think the rule exists, let's not touch it. So you again put it in a frame that it's very difficult for you to break. But when you see it as, well, this is a status quo. What is it that I can do to change the status quo? Well, then you have to break the rule or change the rule. So that is innovation in many senses, right?
Yeah.
So to give you a quick example, I got this team and a project, not just a project, a market actually, that we're doing very poorly in. It's not our best market. And, it was very challenging to succeed in that market. But if you remember the rule, it's the people that are closest to the boss always get the best projects. So if they give you something, it's usually the worst project. They're not going to give you the best one because you're the guy who sits quietly and does no complaints and then is not complaining. So it does all the work. So, in that case, when you get the project, you can throw a tantrum and then you say this is unfair, blah, 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 because it's not a great project to work on. But I took that project on because it was just challenging. Again, the problem statement I was looking for is why are we losing more than anything? Ignore what he's trying to do and not. And why are we continuously losing? So it was a gradual decline in that market over a decade almost. And it was an interesting problem. So ignore what he's doing and forget what they're trying to achieve. Let's just look at it. So it took me a while, almost a year, to actually uncover the real root cause of the problem. Multiple problems existed, and I had to come back. Now, here's the real challenge. Because when I come back and propose a solution, nobody wants to accept it, right? Because they dismiss the problem, first of all. And two is, it's a declining market, whatever. And on top of that, you're now trying to propose something that they never tried to think about, right? So for them, it's like, oh, you're trying to solve this problem. We all dismiss this. So you're the genius. You think you can solve the problem. That's the attitude too. So you have a problem with your peers. You have a problem with your superiors. And, mostly people are non-believers, right? At that point, when you're trying to say that this declining market, I will change. It's a massive problem when you think about it. But, it took me almost a year, another year since I found a solution actually on the root cause, many root causes actually. And it needed a multifaceted solution, like multiple people in multiple departments have to adjust multiple things. Now that's ripe for office politics, right? You're asking people to change, and so it was a really fascinating journey. And 4 years later, it took me about a year and a half to convince people. I finally had to go to the CEO, like skip multiple levels, and I cannot just go, right? It's office. It's going to be seen as really insubordination. So find chances in a conference, when you're at a conference or when you're at a meeting or something, and talk to the CEO in a sidebar conversation. Stuff like that happened, and then slowly, bit by bit, I was able to push this agenda where they brought in a new person to look at it differently on one piece of the problem. And when he started looking at it, I proposed my idea because he didn't have any history of any of the biases. He was able to make a decision. That's all I needed to go forward with the rest of the pieces. And eventually, it took a while, but you deal with every one of the people that are involved in that in similar ways. But it took me almost 2 years after that point where I could actually get the whole product out, finish the whole thing, get the product out, and show the success. And again, as office politics talk about continuously, when it's successful, many people will come in, right? The very first stage of success, some good people will catch on that, yes, this is going to work. And then you get believers, and then you encircle the non-believers and the skeptics with all these people, and it becomes really good. Today, it's actually a very phenomenal product. We are growing at 100% rate in that market that was declining for so long. And it's a great experience. I have many examples like that. But again, it all started with the idea that I start framing this as office politics to begin with.
Yeah. And it sounds like being very strategic about who you're looking at as the believers, how to bring them on board, how to engage them, to use your analogy from earlier.
It's just that you don't know a lot of these things on how to actually work on. Up front, you can think you can be very strategic and then know the exact plan. This is where I would bring design thinking into play. Design thinking applied to office politics. So you would try something and it may or may not work, but you learn the lessons, go back and refactor the thing, and then go back again, and then go back again. And a bit by bit, this is now really a very fascinating game, and you're building a game, right? And that's how you get it. Because I tried that with many people until I had the sidebar conversation with the CEO who was able to make a quick decision. Because he also struggled with something. And again, talking about your book and Jeff's books, you mentioned this multiple times where you need to find what they want. It's not what you want. Nobody cares about what you want. It's important to understand what they want. And the CEO was struggling with something, and then it was just two birds with one stone kind of concept. I said, hey, how about this? And he immediately jumped on it and made a decision. It helped me. Forget what helped him or not, but it helped me, right? So,
yeah, I want to ask you about how. I mean, there's numerous examples in my book, and I've spent time, in innovation and design thinking myself. But if you think about how do you find out what someone wants, sometimes they will tell you, or it's obvious, but sometimes you have to observe them. And I know you are very good at this because you look at users to develop your games, and there's the iteration part. Is there any technique that you have found effective to really determine what people's needs or wants are, even ones they won't articulate?
Yeah, one of the things you learn in design thinking is how to interview people and how to find insights, right? You have this very deep 3-level interview process you go through to get user insights. And, you first set up the whole thing and you get them to be, ease up with you. And then eventually you start laying the foundation for your stuff. You don't have to go through that level with the CEO or whatnot. You don't have that much time. But at that level, they generally tell you. If it's very high level, they generally may not tell you directly, but they're making statements. They're talking to people, and you can observe those things very easily. At a lower level or your peer level, they're very conservative, or they won't try to reveal because it's a power issue and all whatnot. But that's where you ask questions, because ultimately in design thinking, you're not thinking about your user giving you exact solution, right? Your user is never going to give you that. It's your job to get the insight out of what the user is telling you. So if you practice it enough times, you will come up with the really good questions that will engage them. And this is what I tell everybody. Like if you ask a question and the other person is talking for 10 minutes, it's a great question. If you ask a question and finish an answer in 30 seconds, bad question.
Do you have a favorite question that you ask?
Actually, there's a few. I start with the ideal situation for them. What's your ideal situation look like? Which is not a good question. Design thinking tells you not to ask that type of question. But people love to talk about what they want when you ask them. And if you give them all the power in the world, saying that if as if they're the ones who's going to save the world, and you say that, how would you fix this? Or what would you do? And they love to talk. And you make it even more personal, right? What would this so-and-so, use their name and say, so-and-so do in this situation? And then it pops them up, it feels like a praise. And then they engage in that conversation a lot. And they'll continue to talk. And one thing I noticed is, as an introvert, it's very easy for me to shut up anytime. Other people seem to want to talk a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's less exhausting for you. Listening is easier than talking, so it makes it easy.
Yeah, and this is the rule in sales too, right? The best sales reps actually talk less and they listen more. It's a very powerful skill, particularly if you can pull out these insights through great questions. I think those are some great ones you raised. Keshav, as we talked about this, I mean, it's very easy to get sucked into the tactics and this is interesting around, what you're doing. But there's this part here, you never lose sight of kind of the big picture. You focus innovation management, product management, manage studios around the world and technical teams. And I want to ask you this because innovation we typically don't associate with large companies. You're very good at it in large companies. And we often, or some of the conventional wisdom is, well, innovation is better to be isolated and not get sucked into the politics because it'll shut you down. And so as we're talking about this, why then is, if we call it engaging in politics, important if you are innovating in a company? Is there a reason why, not engaging it is detrimental?
I would say yes. Yeah, obviously. I mean, at this point, it's obvious to me it's detrimental if you're not engaging, because there's no innovation that happens in isolation. You cannot be one person that you think, you're sitting in one corner of the building and you can come up with brilliant ideas. I don't think that exists. At least most of the literature also proves that that doesn't exist. There may be one-off geniuses somewhere sitting in some parts of the world, but most companies don't have those. So you have to harness the collective wisdom of everybody on your team. And if your team needs to follow you, you need to be seen as powerful. They need to trust you that you can move it forward. If you cannot move it forward, they're going to go find some other leader very quickly. And if they have to trust you, they need to see that you can bring things, or you can bring work, or you can bring big problems to solve, whatever that engages them. So you need to bring that the idea of a sense of safety for your team, a sense of achievement for your team, and you cannot bring that if they see you as a weakling, right? Nobody respects someone who cannot stand up for themselves. And people behind you, and they're constantly looking at you and evaluating you, right? They may not be, judging you in the moment to moment, but in their minds, they're processing this information subconsciously or consciously, whether you are the person that they should stand behind. And if you are someone that is taken for a ride, if you're someone that is, stepped over constantly, the whole team is going to feel exactly that way, that they are being stepped over, they are being undermined and all. So how is it good for anyone? I mean, nobody likes to be in that position, right? So you will be, automatically losing your team or the faith of your team at some point. So engaging in it is definitely the right thing to do. And I'm not saying, become this powerful fighter that you're not. If you're an introvert, you're obviously not a powerful fighter. So don't think that you can change that quickly. I don't know, maybe people can change. I haven't. So you have to figure out a way how to deal with it. And whether you figure it out or not, you cannot escape it. Right? That's what I would say. Yeah.
Related to that, in our previous conversations, you've made a comment about, to this point around engaging. People like to talk about themselves. They do enjoy praise. And, you said you have used that judiciously and strategically. How do you do that? Because, as soon as you start praising people, a lot of people will say, you're flattering them. It's fake. It feels very disingenuous and icky, or you're like, kissing butt is sometimes used. How do you think about that? Or when people on your team and you tell them, hey, we've got to engage, you've got to, talk to these stakeholders. How do you think about that? What works?
Actually, a very interesting question. Even I remember in the class with Jeff and later on too, there was a lot of discussion on the topic because people get turned off by this idea of I have to go praise someone. I don't know if it's because it hurts your own ego, or if it's because you feel it's disingenuous, or if it's something else. And most of the time, the good people are actually, when I say good people, I'm talking about very competent people, but also introverts. Because it's something that comes very easy to extroverts, I think. At least I feel that way. But for introverts, it's a very challenging thing. Because one, you feel like your competency should speak for itself. You feel like your work should speak for itself. You don't want to go speak for yourself. You don't want to also go praise someone when you don't think they deserve it. And again, you put this in a right versus wrong frame of mind, and that's not good. But the way I actually have been doing all along is, because it resolved in my mind at some point. I forgot what was it that changed, but it's definitely after the Stanford experience and everything else and discussing with you. And one of the things I do is I genuinely look at what they're saying and what is it that I can get behind. Because the concept you may not get behind, the solution you may not get behind. Maybe the style in which they delivered, or maybe something else. Maybe their presentation was so beautiful. So you can comment on that, right? Hey, that's a great presentation. You can genuinely say that. That's a beautiful presentation. How can I learn how to do this? I don't care about the concept. I don't care about the content of your presentation, but you don't have to mention it. But I do want to mention that this is a great presentation. Your graphics were amazing. How did you get those? Where did you get them? Now you're engaging them again. And you're also praising them, right? It makes them feel good. So there's always something. It's amazing to me that there's no point I found where I couldn't find, even if I disagree with them completely. even if I think this is complete BS, I still find something that they did. It could be just the way they held the mic when they're talking, right? It doesn't matter what it is. But you can still praise them about something. And if we can find that, it's only because you're not letting your judgment come into play. You talk about this in your book, and in the class, Jeff also mentions it. It's that you prejudge things. You already made up your mind that this guy's an idiot. I don't want to listen to him. But that doesn't help. You need his support, or you need something from him, or whatever else is the reason why you're engaged with him in the politics. And so you need that support. So you can find something if you just push that judgment aside and start looking at it objectively, and what is there in this whole thing that I can genuinely like, and you will find something. And I haven't come to a situation where I'd never found anything in any situation actually so far.
Yeah, there's this whole point of kind of learning from others. And you actually made a comment at one point that I liked a lot, which was, go find the people who are skilled at this, whether you like them or not, and kind of study them. Again, kind of goes back to your user observation and so forth. And can you say more about that, or any?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you asked that question, because the reason I made that statement at the time is this one person I was working with, I had no choice but to work with, was very incompetent in that role. And this person has been there for a long time. So they checked out, no real value add to the team or anything. So at that point, and also, not being able to do basic functionality of their job. So one thing I noticed is in the meetings, this person would come in and act very angry. The anger, they just protrude anger at everything. This person would always start with, I hate when people do this. I cannot believe people did this. And everybody thinks that there is some level of competence, especially if you're a new person. You would judge that as, this person is this upset means he or she knows what's actually happening on the ground, the depth of it. They disagree with it so much. But initially, I would have understood the point that they were using anger as a mechanism to use, to gain more power. It never occurred to me at all. But after the class and everything else, I sit in these meetings and I go, wow, this is brilliant. I can learn from her.
So you totally flip that around. And
how I can leverage. Yeah. Until then it was very annoying to you, right? It was very annoying to me that you don't know anything. Why are you acting so badly about this situation? I know about this and I'm not this upset. But when you actually, see that, it amazes you, the level of sophistication that goes into that level of acting, and the way they project power with this anger. Everyone around is now trying to placate them. They forget asking the competency questions, right? You're all focused on how can I bring the anger down, the temperature down. So half the meeting goes into placating this person, right? It's a phenomenal thing to watch. So you watch and you learn. I know it's hard for you to act in the same exact way, but when you're genuinely angry, don't hold back is what I realized.
I love that. When you're genuinely angry, don't hold back. So, thinking about it strategically and how it can be used, learning from that person you would have otherwise dismissed. Any question I didn't ask or you'd like to add here to the conversation?
If I have to end with something, I would say, after all these things, after all these years, I still deal with it. In fact, I'm right now in the middle of a massive political fight, and I'm not super stressed about it. And I actually, I'm handling the team that's stressed about it in a way that they can cope with it. So it's never going to end. So get used to it and become good at it.
Yeah, get used to it, become good at it. And this comment you made, which I've noticed you talked about several years after you went through this transformation, is that politics no longer stresses me out. It was a big stressor for you. And now, okay, it's part of what I do. Have to do it if we want to get things done. And I love the analogy here of framing it as, a game and reframing the problem and approaching it that way. Very, very insightful. So thank you, Keshav. And if people want to connect or learn more about you or what you do, what is the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, I would say.
Great. We'll put your LinkedIn there in the show notes. Keshav, I know you're traveling around the world, and thank you also for connecting to us from India today, one of your global stops. So very much appreciate you sharing your time in your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to 97% Effective, where we skip happy talk and help you break through and ascend one hard truth at a time. Help others discover this show. Leave a review and rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, you can get free resources, including the first chapters of Michael's book, Get Promoted, on his website, www.changwinderoth.com. That's www.changwenderoth.com.